quick update. I'm not even sure what I have to say. Hey everyone, it's Nadine from Nadine Walks, and I'm back with a quick video today. I thought I would do a fun little video all about bloopers and blunders of the Camino. So I've already done a video all about mistakes that I've made on the Camino. And I think that video really kind of talks about some of the bigger stuff, bigger mistakes that I've made. But I thought it would be fun to talk about some of the little missteps along the way, the smaller things, the little mistakes that we make. And I know I make a lot of them, and other pilgrims do too. So to jump right in, the first one, I kind of go back to my very first night before I walked my first Camino from Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port to Santiago. I was staying in a gîte or an auberge in Saint-Jean, and there was a communal dinner where I was staying, so I ate with the pilgrims. I think afterward, I kind of sat on the terrace and I journaled. I may have even gone for an evening walk. And then I came back and went up to the bunk room to where I was staying, and I was ready to go to bed. And I don't know how late it was. I don't think it was that late. It couldn't have been 10 p.m., but everyone in my bunk room was already in bed, lights were off, people were sleeping. So I walk in a little bit panicked because I was so worried about disturbing other people. I didn't really have my bunk set up. My things were, there might have been a locker where I had put some things in, but I didn't know where my toothbrush was. So I had to kind of root around in the dark, and I started making noise. And I was just so self-conscious about the fact that I was the one that was up bothering all the other pilgrims. Then I go to get in my bed, and I think I had kind of thrown my sleeping bag up there, but I hadn't set it up yet. And this again was my first Camino, and it was the first time I was using this sleeping bag. And so I went to kind of unzip it, but the zipper got stuck. And so, I'm sitting on this bunk bed, and, I'm on the top bunk. It was creaking, making all this sound as I got up into the bed. And then as I'm trying to open up my sleeping bag, I'm just making more noise. So I tried for a few minutes, but if you've ever been in an albergue room or this small kind of close room with all these people trying to sleep, that sound travels. So every single sound and movement I was making, I felt was bothering other people. And I did. I started to hear people tossing and turning, a couple of loud sighs. So I finally just decided to go to bed without really getting in my sleeping bag. And I think really I could have crawled inside, but I was so afraid of making more noise that I just kind of laid down on top of the sleeping bag. And I thought, okay, it's warm enough in the room, it's not gonna be a problem. But it just got colder throughout the night, and I was shivering. I think in the end, I never got inside the sleeping bag because I was paranoid about making noise. I think I kind of half covered the sleeping bag. When I woke up in the morning, I was against the bare mattress, and I just remember thinking well, if there's ever a time to get bed bugs, this was probably it. I didn't get bed bugs, but I had a very unpleasant night of sleep. And just, again, it makes me think of how I was, when I'm first starting out, when all of us are first starting out on a Camino, there are dozens of things we don't know, and it's okay. In the end, I'm laughing about it now. Maybe I disturbed other pilgrims, and maybe I had a kind of chilly night where I didn't sleep inside my sleeping bag, but I figured it out pretty quickly after that. So another little mistake I made, I keep a water bottle on the side of my pack that's accessible throughout the day, but I also keep a much larger water bottle in my pack, and that's kind of my backup. But sometimes if it's a long day, a hot day, I will absolutely use water from my backup supply. And when that gets low, I like to refill it. So there was a time on one of my Caminos where I had stopped at a fountain, opened up my bag, took out that big bottle, filled it all up, put it back in my bag, and started walking. And at some point, I hadn't gone very far, but I had kind of reached around my bag, and I must have felt something because I noticed the bottom of the bag was wet. And I kind of took off my pack, and I saw water kind of forming at the bottom, dripping out. So I opened up my pack, and it turns out I didn't screw the cap fully on that water bottle, and water was leaking everywhere and getting all of my stuff wet. Another blunder that I've made is getting lost in the dark. So this was the first time I'd ever actually walked early enough in the morning when it was still dark outside. And I think it was on my Camino Primitivo. I had a long day planned, and one of my friends who I'd been walking with, he was leaving really early. He said, it's a long day, it's gonna be hot, I'm gonna leave pretty early. And so I left a little bit after him, but I wasn't walking with him. And it was pretty dark. It was, I'm not sure how early, maybe 30 minutes before sunrise, but it was dark in the sky. And I thought I had kind of figured out where to go, but clearly I missed an arrow, because I was walking for a while and I got to the sense that something didn't quite feel right. And I can't remember all the particulars, but in the end, it turned out that I walked in a big circle and ended up right back in the village where I started. So I wasted like 30 minutes, added a few kilometers onto my stage. And that was a little lesson for me that I'm gonna be very cautious about when I walk in the dark. Another time where I got a little bit turned around, this was on the first day of my chemin d'Arles. I was walking 3 days on the chemin d'Arles, starting in Oloron-Sainte-Marie, and I was walking to Somport to connect with Camino Aragonés. So I had arrived in Oloron the evening before, and that morning I set off. So it was my first day that summer of walking and on a Camino. I was so excited. Had lots of energy walking down the path. And then I realized, again, probably after 20 minutes or so, that I was walking in the wrong direction. And really, on those stages in Oloron, you walk for a couple of days until you're in the mountains heading up to Somport. And as I was walking out of Oloron, I started to realize that, I think I turned around, noticed the mountains were behind me, and I was moving away from the mountains. And I just felt like an idiot for going the exact wrong direction. So I turned around, righted myself, again, added some distance onto the day, but it worked out okay in the end. And another time on that Camino, a few days later, I had another blunder. And this was kind of one that happened in a way to me. It was someone else's mistake. And I wanted to include it here because it had a really nice kind of ending. So I was staying in one of the gîtes in France, and I can't remember the name of the town, but this was the stage right before I was heading up into the mountains to Somport. So I had stayed there overnight, and when I checked into the gîte, I had to go to like the bar or restaurant in the village to check in with the host, get the key. And I paid for my night in the gîte, and I also opted in for breakfast. So I paid whatever it was, 6-7 euros for a breakfast. And the host said that either later that night or really early in the morning, he was gonna come in and put out the breakfast things. So I went to the gîte, made my dinner, went to bed, woke up the next morning, and I was the only one in the gîte, but I came downstairs and there was nothing out for breakfast. And it wasn't super early, and I just kind of figured they totally forgot. And I remember being really disappointed because I had not a super long stage, but a really difficult stage ahead. And it was raining outside. I just knew it was gonna be a challenging day. And it was hard to kind of start the day without the breakfast I was expecting. But I did have instant coffee with me, so I made coffee, and I had a hunk of bread that I was kind of part of the bread that I was gonna have for lunch. So I ate a little something, packed up my stuff, and left. I did kind of stop by the bar restaurant just to see if it was open to ask about breakfast, but it was closed. Everything in the village was still closed. So I started walking, and that first stretch of the day started with several kilometers, maybe I think 4 or 5 kilometers on a pretty busy road. And at times the shoulder was really narrow, and it wasn't a great part of this walk. It was a little dangerous. Cars are rushing past. It was raining. I hadn't really had a good breakfast. I wasn't in the best mood. But at some point I noticed a car was kind of moving slowly behind me. And then that car passed me, and further on up, there was a little like section where the car could kind of pull over, a place for it to kind of park. And when I caught up then to that car, a man jumped out, and I realized it was the host of where I'd stayed the night before. And he saw me, and he was so apologetic. When he realized he hadn't left breakfast, and he might have realized because I left a little note out that just kind of said, petit déjeuner, with a little frowny face, just to kind of say like, oh, he forgot the breakfast. He might not have even seen the note. He might have woken up and realized he forgot to put it out. But he got in his car and he came out to find me. And we're standing there on the side of the road in the rain. He's like pushing money into my hand, refunding me for what I paid. He had also brought some fruit with him. He had put orange juice into an empty water bottle that he gave to me and was just so apologetic. And I just remember thinking it was such a nice turn of events that even though I didn't get breakfast and that was kind of a bummer, it just reminded me, right, that everyone makes mistakes, and here is someone trying to find me, chase me down in the rain, give me my money back, give me what food he had. And it was so kind. And then I kind of felt badly for even leaving a note at all because it was just a breakfast. I survived, it was okay. But again, a reminder, everyone makes mistakes. Then there were times when, and this has happened multiple times, that I have gotten myself a little bit off track when I have taken an alternate route or a detour or a shortcut. Never again. I don't even know where I'm supposed to go. I don't even know if this is gonna work. And, getting off track, it's not the end of the world, but there were several times when I got off track that I ended up walking through a pretty overgrown area and went through a patch of stinging nettles. So I'm going to play a clip from one of those times. This was I think this was in 2019 on the Camino del Norte when I took the beautiful alternate path out of Santander. So it just took me like 30 minutes to, I don't know, try to figure out where to go. I had to get over on the other side of those rocks to where I am now, and I missed the turn off because I started following this old guy and his dog, and then I ended up on a road, but I knew it was pulling me away from the coast. In the distance I could see the path, so then I went in an area where I thought maybe the path was, but it was a field of sheep. I definitely wasn't supposed to be there because from far off in the distance I heard a guy yelling at me, and I think maybe he was trying to be helpful, but since I don't fully understand Spanish, I don't know. So on the way back down from that field, I walked through a big old patch of stinging nettle, so now my ankles are on fire, but I am back on the right track. And then finally, there have also been multiple times that I have messed up the food situation. So this is just when maybe I've counted on stopping by a bar, restaurant, or shop in town and found that it was closed, or I arrive in town never really having lunch, but I'm too late for lunch hours, or I'm hungry in the evening and there's no place open for food until much later. And even though I walked a lot of Caminos, and I know what the food hours are in Spain, I can still kind of mess it up at times. So this example was when, it was 2021, and I was on the Camino Primitivo in Spain, and we were still kind of in the middle of COVID in the summer of 2021. Spain was open for tourists, but they still had a lot of restrictions in place. And in different regions of Spain and in Galicia at the time, you needed proof of vaccination to get into a lot of establishments and a lot of restaurants and bars. And so I was at the end of the Camino Primitivo. It had already merged with the Frances. I was in La Bacoya, which is 11 kilometers from Santiago. And I was staying there that night. And it might have been a Sunday because everything was closed and the little grocery store was closed. So there was only really one restaurant in town that was open, and it was like a 15-20 minute walk from my albergue. And the weather that day had been raining on and off. And again, my food situation, I just hadn't planned it very well. So it was late afternoon, early evening. I think I set off from the albergue around 6 o'clock or arrived at this restaurant around 6. And I knew I might not be able to get a meal, but I had looked up this place online and I had read all these reviews from pilgrims that had said, this place is great, their kitchen is open at all hours, you can eat pretty much anytime. So I was really hoping that would be the case. But then I arrived, it turns out the kitchen was closed. I would have to wait till 8 o'clock until it opened to get a meal. And it turns out that I had accidentally left my vaccination card or proof of vaccination back in the albergue. And it wasn't a far walk, it's 15 or 20 minutes, but again, the weather's not great. It was kind of chilly. I had already walked a really long stage that day. I was tired, I was hungry. So I figure I'll just sit down, I'll get a glass of wine, and then I'll kind of figure out what to do. And let me play this video clip that kind of details sort of what happened then after I was kind of finishing up with that drink. So it just started to really rain, but I think they took pity on me because they brought me a menu and said they would cook something for me. I'm like the American sitting alone outside in the rain who didn't bring her proof of vaccination card. Oh, and arrived way too early for dinner, but I'm so hungry. So thank goodness they're gonna make something for me, which is just so kind. And I'm gonna hope this rain stops before I have to walk back. So in this case, it was another situation when all worked out okay, but I kind of remember thinking like, hey, I'm a veteran pilgrim at this point. Shouldn't I know how to do this a little bit better? And then speaking of that, this is actually my last little blunder. And this was from not a walk on the Camino, but my walk in Norway this past summer. So talk about, right, a veteran walker. This is my most recent walk. I've been doing Caminos for 10 years, long distance walks for 10 years. And somehow, so I was staying, let me start with this. I was staying in an accommodation and my host, she had made dinner that night. It was me and another pilgrim. And she was kind of talking about breakfast the next morning, about what time it is. And I guess she was asking for our drink order, what we'd want to drink. Somehow, apparently, I told them that I wanted tea the next morning and not coffee. And if you know me, if you've been watching these videos for a while, you know how much I love coffee. I need coffee first thing in the morning. I never opt for tea unless I'm like really sick. And look, this whole conversation took place in English. We weren't even speaking Norwegian. We're speaking in English. I don't know how I asked for tea because like the next morning I came down for breakfast and the other pilgrim, he had a whole little French press full of nice hot coffee and I had a little tea kettle and a cup for tea. And I was so disappointed. I couldn't imagine what happened. And the other pilgrim insisted that I asked for tea. And I'm still laughing about it. And the host, she ended up making me some coffee and I paid her a little extra money to kind of cover up for that mistake. But again, all of this to say is that, you know, we all make mistakes and we have these little missteps and blunders and it's just part of the experience. So, you know, despite walking for all of these years, I know that I will never have a perfect walk or a perfect Camino. And it really is part of why I go and I travel and I have these experiences. I think it's all part of the fun of it. And I know there are definitely things that I've learned, but I also know that I will continue to make mistakes. And let's just hope the mistakes are on the smaller side, just like the examples I gave here today. So if you can, in the comment section of this video, share what little mistakes that you've made. Like me, do you kind of get the food situation a little messed up sometimes, or have you lost your way? Do you end up in a field full of stinging nettles? Let us know in the comments. So thanks as ever for being here, and I'll be back soon. Buen Camino.